Hello and welcome back to the Nations Prism, your lens into the fascinating tapestry of global cultures. Did you know that only 5% of British people actually eat a traditional full English breakfast every day? While over 80% of urban Vietnamese eat breakfast on the street? And here's the shocking part: the supposedly healthy British. Breakfast contains a staggering 1,279 calories, double the global average, and has been ranked as the least healthy breakfast in the world. If you think the British wake up to fry-ups every morning and the Vietnamese only eat pho, you've completely misunderstood the breakfast cultures of these two nations. Today, we're diving deep into the untold stories behind these morning meals, from how a 13th century aristocratic feast became the symbol of the working class, to why Vietnamese people transformed sidewalks into communal dining rooms for entire communities. What you're about to discover will completely change how you see these two breakfast traditions. Let's start with something that will blow your mind. The full English breakfast, now associated with greasy spoon cafes and working-class culture, actually began in the grand halls of medieval nobility. In the 13th century, wealthy landowners would host elaborate morning hunts, followed by massive feasts featuring everything from wild boar to exotic birds. These weren't quick morning meals. They were displays of power and wealth that could last for hours. The bacon, eggs, and sausages we see today are the humble descendants of those extravagant spreads. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Vietnamese breakfast culture was taking a completely opposite journey. Pho, now selling for $10 to $15 a bowl in trendy New York restaurants, started as a simple peasant meal in the rice fields of northern Vietnam. Rice noodle soup was the practical solution for farmers who needed something warm, filling, and made from whatever ingredients they could afford. It was the food of necessity, not luxury. The irony is breathtaking. The aristocratic meal became the people's breakfast, while the peasant's bowl became a global delicacy. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Industrial Revolution completely transformed the British. Breakfast from a leisurely aristocratic ritual into fuel for the working masses. When factories started demanding 12-hour shifts from their workers, the full English evolved into something else entirely: a caloric powerhouse designed to sustain manual laborers through brutal working conditions. Every component served a purpose: the protein from eggs and meat for muscle recovery, the carbohydrates from bread and beans for sustained energy, and the fat from bacon and sausages for long-lasting fuel. It wasn't just breakfast. It was survival food disguised as a meal. Vietnamese breakfast culture experienced its own transformation, but through urbanization rather than industrialization. As people moved from rural farms to bustling cities like Saigon and Hanoi, they didn't abandon their street food culture, they amplified it. The narrow alleys and sidewalks became outdoor kitchens, with vendors serving fresh pho, banh mi, and xoi from dawn until mid-morning. But here's the fascinating part. Unlike the British breakfast that adapted to industrial schedules, Vietnamese breakfast maintained its agricultural timing. Even in modern Ho Chi Minh City, authentic pho vendors open at 5 a.m. and close by 9. Miss that window and you're out of luck. This brings us to one of the most striking differences: the relationship with time itself. British breakfast culture embraces the concept of all-day breakfast. Walk into any cafe in London at 3 in the afternoon and you can still order a full fry-up. It's become so disconnected from actual morning consumption that many pubs serve it as comfort food for late-night revelers. The weekend full English has transformed into a leisurely ritual. It's often accompanied by newspapers and multiple cups of tea, stretching well into what most cultures would consider lunchtime. Vietnamese breakfast operates on completely different temporal rules. There's an almost sacred quality to the morning hours between 5 and 9 a.m. This isn't just about vendor schedules. It's about freshness, community, and the rhythm of daily life. Vietnamese breakfast culture insists that certain foods belong to certain hours, and crossing those boundaries feels wrong on a cultural level. A Vietnamese person living in London often mentions that what they miss most isn't just the taste of pho, but the impossibility of finding it at 6 in the morning when their body clock demands it. The social architecture of these breakfast cultures reveals even deeper contrasts. Walk into a British cafe, and you'll find individual tables, proper chairs, and an emphasis on personal space, even in communal settings. The knife and fork create a formal dining experience that maintains boundaries between strangers. There's something inherently private about eating a full English, even when you're surrounded by other people doing exactly the same thing. Now, picture a Vietnamese breakfast scene. Plastic stools barely 20 centimeters off the ground. Shared tables where strangers become temporary neighbors. And chopsticks that somehow make the entire experience feel more connected to the food itself. The low seating isn't a sign of poverty or informality. It's a deliberate cultural choice that transforms the sidewalk into a communal living room. Here, a tech CEO might find themselves sharing a table with a motorcycle taxi driver and a university student, all united by their need for morning nourishment and their acceptance of this democratic dining arrangement. This communal aspect leads us to one of the most shocking revelations about these breakfast cultures: the nutritional divide that defies all expectations. That full English breakfast, sitting pretty on a proper plate with knife and fork, packs an astronomical 1,279 calories. To put that in perspective, it contains 280% more processed food than the global average and 204% more sodium than what nutritionists recommend for an entire day. We're talking about a single meal that exceeds the daily caloric needs of many people worldwide. But here's the twist that changes everything. This caloric bomb was originally designed for people who would burn every single one of those calories before lunch. Victorian era, construction workers, coal miners, and factory laborers needed that massive energy input to survive 12-hour shifts of back-breaking physical labor. The full English wasn't created as a leisurely weekend treat. It was engineered as working-class fuel. Today's office workers consuming the same meal are getting nutrition designed for people doing it's manual labor that most of us can't even imagine. Meanwhile, that humble bowl of pho clocks in at just 400 to 600 calories, perfectly balanced with fresh herbs, lean protein, and rice noodles that provide sustained energy without the crash. It was designed for a completely different climate and lifestyle. Hot, humid conditions where heavy foods would be unbearable, and agricultural work that required steady energy rather than explosive bursts. The Vietnamese breakfast tradition evolved around freshness, lightness, and ingredients that wouldn't spoil in tropical heat. Irony deepens. When you look at modern consumption patterns, only 5% of British people actually eat a full English breakfast daily, while 61% of Vietnamese people consume noodle-based breakfasts every single morning. The British have largely abandoned their traditional breakfast for practical reasons, while the Vietnamese have maintained theirs despite rapid urbanization and Western influence. Yet globally, the full English is seen as quintessentially British, while pho is often dismissed as just another Asian noodle soup. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating contrast: the menu philosophy that reveals everything about how these cultures approach choice and tradition. The full English operates on what we might call the sacred formula. Walk into any cafe from Cornwall to Scotland. You'll encounter the same 7 components: bacon, eggs, sausages, baked beans, grilled mushrooms, grilled tomatoes, and toast. There might be regional variations. Scottish establishments might add haggis. Welsh cafes might include laverbread, but the core remains unchanged. This standardization creates comfort through familiarity. A British person can walk into any breakfast establishment in their country and know exactly what to expect. Vietnamese breakfast culture operates on the complete opposite principle: infinite variety with an infinite possibility. A single street in Ho Chi Minh City might offer pho bo, phoga, bun bo, hu, mi quang, hu tu nam, vong ban mi, zoi.com, tam, and dozens of other options, each with their own regional variations and personal touches from individual vendors. A British tourist spending 30 days in Vietnam could theoretically eat 30 completely different breakfast dishes and still barely scratch the surface of what's available. This contrast reveals something profound about how these cultures process tradition and innovation. British breakfast culture finds comfort in consistency. The reassurance that some things never change in a rapidly evolving world. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing that a full English in Manchester will be fundamentally the same as one in Brighton. It's tradition as anchor, providing stability in an uncertain world. Vietnamese breakfast culture finds joy in discovery, the excitement of endless possibilities within familiar frameworks. The comfort comes not from sameness, but from the knowledge that quality and freshness are maintained across infinite variety. Its tradition as exploration, where heritage provides the foundation for continuous creativity rather than rigid repetition. The drink cultures surrounding these breakfasts tell their own fascinating story. English breakfast tea, consumed by 70% of British women as their morning beverage of choice, represents a slow, contemplative ritual. The proper brewing time, the addition of milk, the accompanying digestive biscuits, all create a pause in the morning rush. Tea time isn't just about caffeine. It's about creating a moment of calm reflection before the day begins. Vietnamese coffee culture operates in the complete opposite direction. High-octane energy injection designed for immediate impact. Single glass of Cuy Sua Da, Vietnamese iced coffee with sweetened condensed milk, can contain 3 times the caffeine content of an Italian espresso. It's not sipped contemplatively. It's consumed quickly for maximum effect. The preparation is theater, the consumption is fuel, and the result is immediate readiness for whatever chaos the urban street might throw at you. Here's the colonial irony that nobody talks about. Tea originated in Asia, but became the foundation of British calm, while coffee came from Western trading routes, but became the engine of Vietnamese urban energy. The cultural adoption completely reversed the geographical origins, creating drinking cultures that perfectly matched each society's approach to morning preparation. Now, let's shatter some myths that have shaped how the world sees these breakfast cultures. Because the reality is far more complex and surprising than the stereotypes suggest. First, the myth of ancient British tradition. Ask most people about the full English breakfast, and they'll tell you it's a timeless Anglo-Saxon tradition stretching back centuries. This is completely false. The full English as we know it today didn't exist before the 19th century. Before the Industrial Revolution, even wealthy British families ate completely different morning meals. Porridge, bread, cheese, and ale were far more common than the elaborate fry-ups we associate with British culture today. The components we consider traditionally British tell a different story entirely. Baked beans? They're an American import that didn't become popular in Britain until the 20th century. Bacon as we know it was influenced by Danish and German curing techniques. Even the cooking methods, frying everything in the same pan, evolved from practical necessity in cramped industrial housing rather than culinary tradition. The full English is actually a relatively modern invention. It's cobbled together from international influences and working-class pragmatism. On the Vietnamese side, there's the persistent myth that Vietnamese people primarily eat pho for breakfast. This stereotype has become so entrenched that many Western food documentaries present pho as the breakfast of an entire nation. The reality? 59% of Vietnamese people do not choose pho as their primary breakfast food. Banh mi, soy sticky rice, bun various noodle soups, and com tam broken rice dishes are equally popular, if not more so in certain regions. Pho bo beef noodle soup is actually more commonly consumed in northern Vietnam. While southern regions have completely different breakfast preferences, the myth of unhygienic Vietnamese street food deserves special attention because it reveals how cultural bias distorts perception. Western travelers often approach Vietnamese breakfast vendors with suspicion, assuming that food prepared on sidewalks must be dangerous. What they don't understand is that Vietnamese locals operate sophisticated quality assessment systems based on factors invisible to outsiders: the turnover rate of ingredients, the reputation of specific vendors passed down through generations, the freshness indicators that experienced customers can read at a glance, and the social proof of crowded stalls indicating both quality and safety. Meanwhile, a supposedly healthy British breakfast has been scientifically ranked as the least healthy traditional breakfast in the world. A single full English contains 95% more calories than the global breakfast average, levels of processed meat that exceed WHO recommendations for entire weeks, and enough saturated fat to put most people over their daily limits before 9 a.m. Yet it's still marketed and perceived as hearty, wholesome fare. The timing myths reveal even deeper cultural misunderstandings. British breakfast culture has embraced the all-day breakfast concept to such an extent that many establishments serve more full English breakfasts after noon than before it. Weekend brunch culture has transformed what was once a utilitarian, working-class meal into a leisurely social activity that can stretch for hours. The irony is that the people who most need those calories, manual laborers starting work at dawn, the least likely to have time for the elaborate breakfast originally designed for them. Vietnamese breakfast timing operates on completely different principles that reflect both agricultural heritage and urban efficiency. The 5 to 9 a.m. window isn't arbitrary. It's built around the optimal freshness of ingredients, the natural rhythm of daily life, and the practical reality that street vendors need to clear sidewalks before business hours begin. This isn't inflexibility. It's a sophisticated system that maximizes quality while respecting urban flow. The economics of these breakfast cultures reveal fascinating class dynamics that challenge common assumptions. In Britain, the full English has become increasingly expensive, with quality versions in trendy establishments costing upwards of £15. What started as affordable working-class fuel has been gentrified into weekend luxury for people who can afford to treat breakfast as entertainment rather than necessity. Budget versions still exist, but they often sacrifice quality for price, creating a two-tier system that would have baffled the original working-class consumers. Vietnamese breakfast culture maintains remarkable price accessibility despite urbanization and economic growth. A bowl of authentic pho still costs less than $2 in most Vietnamese cities. It's making it genuinely democratic food that serves everyone from construction workers to business executives. The quality differential exists, but it's based on technique and ingredients rather than exclusivity. An expensive pho might cost $3 instead of $2. But both versions maintain the fundamental accessibility that defines Vietnamese breakfast culture. This accessibility difference reflects broader cultural attitudes toward food and social equity. British breakfast culture has largely accepted stratification, different quality levels for different economic classes, with premium versions explicitly marketed as luxury experiences. Vietnamese breakfast culture resists this stratification. It's maintaining the principle that everyone deserves access to fresh, quality morning food regardless of economic status. The generational changes happening in both cultures reveal how global forces are reshaping local traditions in unexpected ways. Young British people are increasingly abandoning the full English for lighter alternatives, with home cooking breakfast rising from 19% in 2022 to 25% in 2024. Largely due to hybrid working arrangements and health consciousness. Meanwhile, the weekend full English is becoming more ritualistic and social, less about nutrition and more about leisure and nostalgia. Vietnamese breakfast culture faces different pressures. Urban young people are increasingly time-pressured, leading to the rise of grab-and-go breakfast options that maintain Vietnamese flavors but sacrifice the communal street-side experience. Yet interestingly, Vietnamese breakfast foods are gaining global popularity. With banh mi shops opening worldwide and pho becoming acceptable, breakfast food in international contexts where it was once considered exclusively lunch or dinner fare, the globalization of these breakfast cultures is creating fascinating hybrid phenomena that neither culture could have predicted. London, the birthplace of the full English, now hosts dozens of pho for breakfast establishments, where British office workers line up at 7 a.m. for Vietnamese noodle soup. These aren't tourist novelties. They're genuine cultural adaptations where Vietnamese immigrants have successfully convinced locals that warm, brothy noodles make perfect sense for British mornings. The queues outside these establishments during London's winter months prove that comfort food transcends cultural boundaries when it meets genuine need. Meanwhile, Ho Chi Minh City has witnessed the rise of all-day English breakfast shops, where Vietnamese entrepreneurs have adapted the British formula for local tastes and climate. These establishments serve air-conditioned refuge from the tropical heat, offering lighter versions of the full English alongside Vietnamese coffee, creating fusion experiences that would confuse traditionalists from both cultures. The success of these hybrid spaces suggests that breakfast culture is becoming more fluid and adaptive than anyone anticipated. The digital age has accelerated these cultural exchanges in unprecedented ways. Vietnamese breakfast vendors are now on food delivery apps, bringing pho and banh mi directly to British homes at 6 a.m. British expatriates in Vietnam document their quest for proper bacon and eggs, while Vietnamese food bloggers rate London's pho offerings against Saigon standards. Social media has created global breakfast communities where a construction worker in Manchester can share breakfast photos with a tech entrepreneur in Ho Chi Minh City, comparing their morning fuel across continents. This digital connectivity has revealed surprising similarities beneath the surface differences. Both cultures prioritize breakfast as essential daily fuel, just delivered through different mechanisms. Both value freshness and quality, though they define and achieve these qualities through different methods. Both maintain strong opinions about authenticity, whether it's the proper way to prepare a full English or the correct herbs for faux garnish. The passion for breakfast excellence transcends cultural boundaries. The health revolution is forcing both cultures to confront uncomfortable truths about their beloved morning traditions. British nutritionists are increasingly vocal about the cardiovascular risks of regular full English consumption, leading to the rise of lighter alternatives like avocado toast and overnight oats among health-conscious consumers. Yet the full English persists as weekend comfort food, suggesting that cultural attachment runs deeper than health concerns. Vietnamese breakfast culture faces different health challenges. While traditional pho and street food remain relatively healthy, the urbanization of Vietnam has introduced processed food options that threaten the fresh ingredient foundation of traditional breakfast culture. Young Vietnamese consumers increasingly choose convenience over tradition, creating tension between cultural preservation and modern lifestyle demands. The environmental impact of these breakfast cultures tells another compelling story. The full English requires massive resource inputs: beef for sausages, pork for bacon, industrial agriculture for beans and tomatoes, and significant carbon footprint for a single meal. As climate consciousness grows, this environmental cost is becoming harder to ignore, especially for a breakfast originally designed for physical laborers who burn those calories immediately. Vietnamese breakfast culture, with its emphasis on fresh vegetables, minimal processing, and local sourcing, appears more environmentally sustainable. However, the urban growth of Vietnam is straining traditional supply chains, forcing vendors to choose between maintaining traditional sourcing methods and meeting increased demand efficiently. The COVID pandemic revealed the resilience and adaptability of both breakfast cultures in unexpected ways. British breakfast culture largely moved indoors, with families rediscovering home cooking and weekend breakfast rituals, becoming more elaborate as compensation for restricted social activities. The full English became comfort food during lockdowns, providing psychological comfort when external certainty disappeared. Vietnamese breakfast culture demonstrated remarkable adaptability, with street vendors quickly pivoting to delivery and takeaway models while maintaining food quality and freshness standards. The communal aspect was temporarily lost, but the cultural foundation proved strong enough to survive disruption and rebuild community connections as restrictions lifted. Looking toward the future, both cultures are evolving in response to global pressures, while maintaining their essential characteristics. British breakfast culture is becoming more health-conscious and internationally influenced, but the weekend full English ritual appears unshakable. Vietnamese breakfast culture is becoming more convenient and globally accessible, but the emphasis on freshness and community connection remains central. The most fascinating development is the emergence of third culture, breakfast options created by people who belong to both traditions. Vietnamese British families are creating fusion breakfasts that combine the heartiness of British tradition with the freshness of Vietnamese technique. British Vietnamese restaurants are serving pho alongside traditional British breakfast items, creating entirely new categories of morning food that belong fully to neither culture and completely to both. These hybrid creations suggest that breakfast culture is entering a new phase where rigid cultural boundaries matter less than functional adaptation to modern life. The future breakfast landscape might include Vietnamese spiced British sausages, British-style, hearty pho, or completely new combinations that draw from both traditions while serving contemporary needs. The technology revolution is also reshaping how both cultures approach breakfast preparation and consumption. British breakfast culture is embracing meal kits and pre-prepared components that maintain traditional flavors while reducing preparation time. Vietnamese breakfast culture is experimenting with grab-and-go, formats that preserve freshness and flavor while accommodating urban schedules. Perhaps most remarkably, both cultures are discovering that their breakfast traditions contain wisdom that extends far beyond morning nutrition. The British full English, despite its health challenges, preserves something increasingly rare in modern life: the concept of taking time for substantial nourishment before facing daily challenges. In a world of grabbed coffee and eaten-on-run energy bars, the ritual of sitting down to a proper breakfast represents resistance to the acceleration of modern life. Vietnamese breakfast culture offers a different but equally valuable lesson. The possibility of maintaining community connection and fresh food access even within rapid urbanization, as cities worldwide struggle with food deserts and social isolation. The Vietnamese model of neighborhood breakfast vendors creating daily gathering points provides a template for sustainable urban food culture. The contrast between these two breakfast philosophies ultimately reveals two different approaches to balancing tradition with modernity. British breakfast culture preserves tradition through ritualization, turning the full English into a special occasion that honors the past while acknowledging present realities. Its tradition as museum piece, carefully maintained and occasionally celebrated, but not expected to serve daily practical needs. Vietnamese breakfast culture preserves tradition through adaptation. It's constantly evolving the delivery mechanisms while maintaining core principles of freshness, community, and accessibility. Its tradition is living system, flexible enough to survive change while retaining essential characteristics that define cultural identity. Both approaches have merit, and both face challenges that will determine their long-term survival. The British approach risks turning breakfast culture into nostalgic performance rather than meaningful daily practice. The Vietnamese approach risks losing its community foundation if urban pressures force too much adaptation too quickly. The global conversation about these breakfast cultures is ultimately a conversation about how we want to live in the modern world. Do we prioritize efficiency over connection? Do we choose convenience over community? Do we value individual comfort over shared experience? These aren't just breakfast questions. They're fundamental questions about the kind of society we're building. The success of Vietnamese breakfast culture in cities like London, and the persistence of British breakfast rituals despite health warnings, suggest that people are hungry for experiences that commercial food culture cannot provide. Neither a grab-and-go protein bar, nor an expensive artisanal coffee can replicate the social connection of sharing a sidewalk table with strangers, or the comforting ritual of a proper weekend breakfast that stretches lazily into the afternoon. The future of breakfast culture might not require choosing between these traditions, but rather learning from both. The Vietnamese emphasis on fresh ingredients and community connection could inform healthier, more socially connected breakfast options worldwide. The British commitment to making breakfast a meaningful ritual rather than rushed necessity could inspire people to prioritize morning nourishment in their daily schedules. Young people from both cultures are already creating these syntheses, combining the best elements of their inherited traditions with practical adaptations for contemporary life. They're proving that cultural authenticity doesn't require rigid adherence to historical practices, but rather understanding and preserving the values that made those practices meaningful in the first place. The breakfast revolution happening in kitchens and street corners worldwide suggests that people are ready to invest more intentionality in how they start their days. Whether that means waking up early for fresh pho on a plastic stool or dedicating weekend mornings to elaborate British breakfast rituals. The common thread is the recognition that breakfast culture shapes not just individual nutrition, but community connection and cultural identity. Through the lens of breakfast, we see two cultures with two journeys moving in opposite directions, one traveling from luxury to everyday life, the other from rural necessity to urban sophistication. But both are converging on the same fundamental insight, that how we eat reveals who we are, what we value, and how we want to connect with others. The future belongs to breakfast cultures that can maintain their essential humanity while adapting to contemporary realities. So here's the ultimate question. If you had to choose between sitting on a plastic stool at 6 a.m., eating steaming pho in the chaotic energy of Saigon streets, cute, or enjoying a leisurely Sunday morning full English in a cozy London cafe with newspapers and endless tea, which would you choose and why? Your answer reveals more about your values and desires than you might expect. That's all for today on the Nations Prism. What surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another cultural deep dive. Share this video with a friend who needs to see this. Till next time, keep exploring.